I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Tower of Fantasy is doing just fine. At least, for now. It seems like Tower of Fantasy is the gacha community's favorite punching bag. It was supposedly the Genshin Killer, as many had touted back when it first released in 2022. But after an initial spike of interest, the game just never really recovered even years later. Now, despite the numbers displaying a consistent downward trend, the game is actually holding steady in the Chinese audience with a small but dedicated player base maintaining and keeping it alive. I thought maybe I was too preemptive with my thoughts on the game when I covered it for the first time. So, after the game version has exceeded version 5.0, let's try revisiting it and see if there's still some magic. Hi, my name is Psyche, and I want to revisit Tower of Fantasy in 2025 and see if the game is still any good. I will try to rate it from a perspective as unbiased as possible, based on my subjective definition of objectivity, as I think my past self and pretty much every gacha player right now love hating on the game. After playing for a couple more weeks, I'll be going over my thoughts on if the game is still in a state of decline and good portions that still warrant praise. So let's begin. For a bit of background, I have no doubt that Hoda Studio has learned a thing or two with Tower of Fantasy's track record, and will not be making the same mistakes when Neverness to Everness eventually releases. There's a number of things you can attribute to when it comes to the game's decline, such as the power creep, the unbalanced events, the dying nature of the MMO genre, and so on. Maybe it's one or a combination of all these factors, or maybe it's something else entirely. Despite its stagnating player base, they have enough funding to continue the game for the time being, with them even sort of joking about an EOS in one of their developer logs. If you take a look at TOF's official Chinese social media pages such as Bilibili, the subscriber count is about 940,000, and the most recent character trailers can reach 100 to 200,000 marks when it comes to views. The CN side is still doing decently enough. The game will not be shutting down anytime soon. I sounded pretty biased in my first review on TOF back when I didn't have much experience with this kind of stuff, but now I hope to form some less biased thoughts on the game and explore everything unique it has to offer. Nonetheless, let's reinstall the game and see what it's all about. Tower of Fantasy is the only gacha game I've played that had a publisher change at some point, and you had to migrate your account so you don't lose it. It was handled by Tencent for a little bit before transferring to Perfect World Games. I put in my request a while back, except I never got it to work, so I guess I'm just starting over again. Not that I had that much on my first account anyways. I'm assuming that you have watched my first review of the game, although I wouldn't say it was the best video. I would not be re-explaining the premise of the game or how its basic gameplay works. TOF is an MMO/gacha fusion and has since had a lot of content added to it. The goal with my revisit is to see just where the game is now. This is not a formal review, and I certainly wouldn't call my last video a good one either. I'll be attempting to engage with as many game elements as it lets me, and will only contain my own experiences as a returning player that played around 10 to 20 hours. Also, TOF takes the crown for the biggest gacha game I've installed on my hard drive, clocking in at just over 84 gigabytes. This is double the size of other big-budget gacha games, and I shudder to think how the mobile players are faring. I guess there's just a lot of content in the game. Also, ever since I upgraded my computer and unlocked ray tracing capabilities, I will be setting the in-game graphics to its maximum this time around. Whatever footage you see is the game looking at its best. So I should mention this in case people decide to start playing. When you complete the intro chapter, there's a time skip that skips the entire 1.0 story by default, and you can actually go straight to the newest chapters if you want. Since I explored Vera and Domain 9 last year, I thought, what can possibly go wrong? Let's go straight to this new planet called Network? Now, the story is unfortunately the one thing you can't fix, unless the game just completely redoes it at the cost of not developing new content instead. Whatever story is there at launch will be there for as long as the game is in service. Apparently, there's a lot of outdated lore that the story is trying to sweep under the rug, though something I noticed is that starting with the newest areas isn't the most intuitive to beginners, as you're introduced to many features at once, such as the mecha and the large empty spaces, instead of the easy-to-understand exploration in the starter regions, so I would strongly consider just letting the game play on its own. Going through the story cutscenes, at one point I was a little confused on where I was supposed to be going, as the waypoint was scattered across the map and I didn't see any teleport points. It was only after I saw a passageway to a lower level that I learned where to head to the objective. The game surprisingly gave me a free SSR character with a weapon at level 120, plus a good surplus of armor pieces. I thought, alright, I get to play with a cool updated SSR, those are some pretty decent gifts for a new player. While I can't really follow the story up to this point, I think it's still completely valid to critique its presentation. Let's just say, if you care about the story, you probably shouldn't play with the English dub. For example, at this point in the story, I follow a trail of blood and find the NPC Pippin laying on the ground with a sharp object stabbed into his stomach. A harrowing scene indeed, and all we can do is listen to its heartfelt, dying words.
Secretary General? Who are you? Is it because of Blue Planet? They're looking for something called the Perfect Authorizer's Key, but I've never heard of anything like that.
Absolutely devastating. This poor soul was even showing early signs of rigor mortis.
Oh my god, I can't believe my eyes.
To the game's credit, the Smart City, or I think how it's called, looks very nice, with ray-traced shadows, realistic waves crashing against the beach, and a wide degree of visual spectacles, like being able to walk around in these gravity-defying roads. I thought maybe it would have been even better if I had a car or something. As I was exploring, I saw an openable chest in the form of an airdrop, except I didn't know how to open it, and the pop-up hint didn't give any useful info. I know there's the thrill of figuring stuff out yourself, but come on, opening a treasure chest? I feel like I shouldn't have to look this up. My brief moment of serenity was cut short when I realized that I was no longer using my OP level 120 SSR, and I was back to using my base character equipped with nothing but my bare fists. I checked my inventory and roster, and I couldn't find her anywhere. So it finally hit me. I didn't get a free SSR. It was only a time trial. So after being one-shotted by an overworld enemy, I thought, oh god, I made a mistake turning up the world level, didn't I? Guess I gotta revert it. Naturally, I turned down the world level since I thought maybe I overdid it as I had the free OP SSR. After turning down the world level a couple times, I realized I made a grave error. Every time you wind down the world level, you require the black crystal thing, which is the currency needed to pull on the gacha. I was only notified of this when the game told me I didn't have enough of it. I didn't pay attention to it since I thought it makes no sense why the game would ask for something like that. Anyways, after messing around in the Kylo space station and the Smart City, going through some of the spoken dialogue made me realize that maybe I understood the story more than I thought. See, if you watch the trailer for the network region in version 4.0, this giant futuristic city is actually the Xperia region set sometime before the events of the base game, meaning that if you compare the two at the right angles, you can see just how much change the world has undertaken in its lore. The city features the time period prior to when a catastrophic event happened, and the introduction region is actually, in a way, the game's epilogue. It just ties everything together quite nicely, and there's an odd sense of narrative cohesion. I mean, what other open-world gacha game has done a version of an existing region set in the distant past or future? As said before, the presentation of the story can be a bit hit or miss. Some portions are not voice acted, as the game conveniently placing the camera to the protagonist's back to hide their lack of facial animations, and the dialogue cutscenes feeling a little stale. However, there's also quite a lot of content to explore, where you can start any quest line at any time, and if you don't care about the MMO aspects, you can easily get lost in exploring other regions and cracking open its loot. So I was whacking away with my twig of a spear until I remembered, oh right, you can hold 3 weapons in this game. The ways that you can power up your character gets pretty convoluted, as each new region also introduces some other way to beef up your kit, even if it's indirectly, like making upgrades to the mech that you pilot in the space regions. This is not including farming certain matrix sets for your weapon, which is basically the relics, but they're obtainable from the gacha. If you're serious about heading into the game, you'll have to take some time figuring out what the upgrades are and how to get the materials for it. To address the issue with power creep, TOF is a game where you'll have to think long term if you decide to jump in. It's an undeniable truth that newer units will outshine the older ones, so it's best to focus on a specific element or archetype and commit your pulse to that, due to how the gacha system works. You will have to be playing the game for a little bit, maybe a few months, before being able to compete in the meta. You just need time and dedication, which I know can be a double-edged sword, as I'll explain later in the video. Can you also make the argument that the game is pay to win? Yes, you can make that argument. More copies of a character obviously means higher power, and there's a decent chunk of existing whales funding the game at the moment. Speaking of whaling, let's quickly circle back to the gacha system. As a reminder, Tower of Fantasy uses the classic Hoyoverse gimmick of a 0.75% 5-star drop chance, a 50% rate up chance, and an 80 pull pity, but does not have a second rate up guarantee. The hard pity takes on the form of a spark at 120 pulls, where you can buy the SSR in the shop. I made sure to verify that the 120 pity does not carry over to the next banner, so you'll have to be saving up for those red nuclei until you have enough to pity one. You cannot build pity in this game by default. The 120 pulls mark is what ultimately matters. Unless you get the equivalent of 120 pulls saved up before the banner expires, there's no guarantee you'll get the rate-up SSR. In all honesty though, I think it's fine. According to some players, the pull income really isn't hard to accumulate. I obviously can't personally attest to this, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Non-carryover pities have always existed in gacha games. I should note there is a hidden pity counter where you can't lose more than 2 50-50s in a row, but you also can't win more than 2 in a row either. So if you already lost the coin flip 2 times and are at 79 out of 80 on the banner, then you're guaranteed the rate up. I should also note, 4 stars hardly matter at all. They exist as fodder. The game has not released any new 4 stars after its initial launch, so you'll just be using 5 stars from now on. The only purpose for them is that if you have all of them maxed out, your pity requirement for the limited SSR slightly decreases. This game has been in service since 2022, meaning that it's released a fair amount of new characters and unfortunately only new SSRs. I fear this may be the trend with NTE when that comes out as well. Well, given that I unknowingly played during the 3rd anniversary, there was a free selection banner where you can choose an SSR to be on rate up, but the normal rules of the gacha applies. The game gave me around 10 limited pulls on my return. I do know that the game does periodically add SSRs to the permanent pool, but you can only get them on the standard banner, not the limited ones. Huge missed opportunity if you ask me. Losing 50-50s wouldn't suck as much. I got a free SSR from the scratch card event and luck sacked this version of Nemesis from the anniversary banner. So why doesn't the game release new 4 stars, and why is every new limited SSR a waifu with big milkers? Well, ignoring this odd sense of deja vu, I almost forgot to mention, a while back, TOF has gone the Snowbreak route, where male characters barely see the light of day, and it introduced a dorm mode where you can become extremely parasocial with its customizations. The natural cycle of gacha games, I guess. So we'll take a look at that next. Looking at the dorm mode, I was surprised to find that you don't need to own the characters to enter their dorm. You get the cosmetic tickets from just doing weekly missions, so that's pretty nice. Wow, I guess what goal I'll be setting for myself for the next week. However, at a second glance, while you can enter their dorm, you cannot actually buy any of their furniture, clothing, or interactions unless you own a copy of their weapon, and in specific cases, only when you have them at a certain dupe level. I was successfully jebaited. While we're on the topic of fan service, from the time I checked, there were 4 different skin gachas with summer outfits. Damn, I guess Hoda really wants that dough. Do I have to pay $200 for these? Now, to be completely fair, the system that TOF uses for its skin gacha mirrors PGR, one of the most respected gachas out there. You can use the free earnable currency to pull on the gacha in addition to the paid currency as well. Believe me, back when I reviewed PGR, you bet that there were people that defended this, saying that you can technically save up and get the skin for free. So, if you think the skin gacha in PGR is okay, then you don't get to criticize this. If you ask me what I think skin gachas are a plague upon this genre of games, regardless of which game it's in and how it's implemented. But hey, just my opinion. As I conclude my brief return to TOF, I think if you still wanted to play today, you still can. Here, I'm going to discuss what I think will be the biggest barriers for new players joining, and where I think the game will go from here. First, it's not a stretch to say that in terms of a Western player base, the game is nowhere near as big as it once was. You can absolutely still jump in today if you wanted to, but there are some things to be aware of. I think the biggest problem the game faces in attracting newcomers is that it's simply too confusing for new players. Generally, games will introduce you to new mechanics once every couple hours or when you discover them yourself. The thing is that TOF just kinda thrusts everything into you all at once. That's not to say if you opted out of the intro storyline, the game will skip the tutorial missions as well. The game will also skip the 1.0 story by default after the intro chapter, so it becomes pretty hard to comprehend what's happening in the lore. In addition, way too many menus. I recall playing a month last year and still not remembering where certain things are. It shouldn't take you 2 minutes to find what the daily missions are. The MMO aspect of the game also encourages long-term play, which the gacha audience these days may not want. The gacha/MMO blend doesn't really fare well in Hoda's favor, as most players just want one or the other. Basically, due to how the meta and gacha system works, this is a game where if you do ever decide to get into, you're gonna want to be staying long-term. Since power creep and feature creep are natural consequences of its lifespan, you want to decide on a role to play when you get into the MMO elements, which will take a bit of planning. Just a side tangent, there was a warp server announced for the CN server, where the monetization will work a bit differently, and where the gacha system is completely taken out. According to this post, characters and weapons will be earnable in-game, and it's a fresh start, so I guess that alleviates the problems with progression and pressure to keep up with the meta. But taking out the gambling? Why would you want to do that? That being said, if you're specifically looking for a gacha and MMO blend, there's a good shot that Tower of Fantasy still fulfills that criteria. There's a wide degree of customization and self-expression, either through a player's avatar or how they play. Undoubtedly, a lot of the uniqueness of TOF comes from your interaction with the community. There's nothing stopping you from playing the game with your buddy while you conquer the different regions, nothing stopping you from engaging in verbal PvP in the world chat. A natural process when a game is losing steam and cannot replace the players that leave with new ones, a better priority will be to monetize the player base that is still present and to keep them there. Despite everything I talked about, the game still survives due to a dedicated player base in China and will continue to operate for the time being. What Tower of Fantasy's future ultimately hinges on, at least in my opinion, is how well Neverness to Everness performs when that comes out. Given that this is Hoda Studios after years of experience in the market, I think it's fair to say they have definitely learned a thing or two from TOF. I'll give NTE a fair shot when that comes out as well, though looking at TOF as a whole, the game is admittedly not the highest quality I've seen. The animations lack a high degree of fluidity, the presentation can be pretty iffy at times, and the overall gameplay has that bit of jank you would expect from an MMO, but you can still play and master it. The diverse regions and the extent of the story content the game has to offer can still absolutely provide hundreds of hours of enjoyment. Might not be the most intuitive or technologically impressive, but it's still there, chugging along in the background since 2022, away from prying eyes, and still very much in a playable state. Despite the company's shortcomings, I still look forward to reviewing NTE and seeing if it becomes Hoda Studios' redemption arc. So there we have it, Tower of Fantasy, far from the best gacha game I played, but still pretty fun nonetheless. Although, let me know what you think. Is TOF at least of some interest, or is it doomed to maintain its irrelevancy? If you want to catch more analytical gacha-related content like this, you know what to do. For those that wish to go the extra mile, you can support me for as little as $2 a month on Patreon. In any case, thank you for tuning in to the review. Be sure to spend moderately, and have fun out there.